Good afternoon. My name's Nick Samios. I'm the Director and Fund Manager here at Hermes Capital. Thank you very much for joining our live stream today, our lunchtime Q&A, normally on a Friday, but it's a public holiday tomorrow. Special hello to anybody who's watching us on replay or in our archive. We've got a number of archives there. We're beginning to build an archive, and so I'd certainly point you to that to make that resource available to you. We've got three guests today. I'll introduce our first guest, Sule from Jirsch Sutherland. How are you going, Sule?
Hey Nick, how are you? Thanks for having us.
In the promos for this, I put you down as a trade-on specialist. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that's one of your talking points, and I know from personal experience that's certainly the case.
Well, there's certainly a little bit more enjoyment in operating businesses and trying to save them rather than just dealing with terminal insolvencies. That's for sure. Yeah,
I mean, obviously you do a lot of insolvency, and we'll get to all of that. I noticed that you're in your office there, or is that a green screen?
No, I'm in the office today. There's no one else here at the moment, so feeling pretty isolated anyway.
Yes.
A break from the children and the wife to be able to do this.
So, as a trade-on expert and as an insolvency practitioner, what do you think's been keeping insolvency practitioners busy this week?
Well, I actually think in the last 2 weeks it's been a pretty sort of shocking situation for most people. I don't think many practitioners have actually been run off their feet in the last couple of weeks as people try and sort of figure out what's going on. It's a very different world for everyone. The inquiry rate certainly in the last week has increased, but a lot of those are still pretty transactional, small type liquidation matters. My strong suspicion is at the back end of whenever the stimulus packages come to an end, who knows if that's in 6 months or whether they're extended again. But we certainly believe when the tap is turned off in some shape, there's going to be a proliferation of SME insolvencies at that point in time.
I'm sort of playing TV producer and panelist at all at one time. So, Brendan, what's keeping insolvency lawyers, restructuring lawyers busy this week?
G'day, Nick, and thanks for having us on board. Much the same as Saul A. I don't think anybody is as busy as, frankly, we thought we might be. This boom's been 27 years in the making, and I thought that at some point it was going to come unstuck. I never saw this coming. No one did. But I think in reality we were probably in recessionary conditions going. Speaking to a lot of people in industry, were struggling earlier this year anyway. Like Sule, we're talking to a lot of people. I think I watched the phone went quieter 3 weeks ago than I've experienced in a long time. We do two things, one litigation and the other one insolvency restructuring. We've got a number of deals that we're still working on, of course, but in terms of new matters, I just got off the phone on one, so that's an example. They're out there, but the government has put moratoriums in place and insolvent trading protection in place, which has stopped a lot of gigs because the triggers that are there for appointments of insolvency practitioners have been rolled back. Although, what I've seen and heard of just recently, I was called this morning about there's a number of funds out there that are looking to maybe enforce now for fear that they'll be frozen out of enforcement.
Wow.
So that's occurring.
And Brendan, just on that, I know when you're talking about funds, we've been speculating internally whether, we're not looking at enforcing, certainly not any property right now, but we've been speculating that the government, which seems to be the stroke of the pen changing everything. Do you think there's a chance that they would actually stop you from enforcing, like put a freeze on enforcement?
I think America's done it, hasn't it? I'm not across it in detail, but my understanding is there's some forbearances in place in America of that sort of arrangement. At least I could be wrong about that, by the way. I haven't looked at it too closely. But yes,
I think it's 24 hours maybe.
I think that's coming. Look at it this way. What would be the point of the other ones if you don't do that? I mean, I think they're all mad. I don't think any of them are a good idea, because all they do is reprice risk, and all that does is reprice assets. So I don't think the government's thought through what they're doing particularly well. However, if you're going to put in moratoriums, well, there's no point saying your unsecured creditors can't wind you up, but your secured creditor can just step in, because there's a lot of businesses that are going to be in basically shutdown for the next whatever.
Yeah.
And so what's the protection for them if a secured can just walk in tomorrow, rip out, as the story I heard this morning, for example, much more vulnerable institution, they being a much less vulnerable institution than yourself, of course, Nicholas, but this mob have ripped into one of these businesses that's been mothballed. So the previous line was, there's no point putting a Sule in just yet, because there's no exit event on the restructure, because no one's going to put money into something when they don't know what the terms are going to be. And so I think the directors thought this was just more, let's just mothball everything and pause things. And that's kind of what the line was. And now, but no one expected the receiver. The receiver's been appointed to rip in and take the debtors and cash. So,
you'd be a bit worried to be the first one to do that right now. Listen, we'll come back to that. I'll just introduce our fourth panelist, Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear. Where did he go? Hang on a sec. There he is. No?
Hey guys, how are you?
Hey, how you going?
Good.
Thanks for joining us. Now, you're our special guest from WA. I think West Australians, as far as I understand it, have been looking for an event like this to shut out those from over east for some time. So I don't know if this
only 87 years we've been waiting for this.
yeah. Now, Jamie, you're a I guess many things. You do business restructuring, but from a management and operations, you're a strategist. You're not an insolvency person, and you also get involved in the funding. What's keeping people like yourself busy this week?
Look, I think everybody's just trying to get a feel for what's going to happen, and I always hate using those sort of catch cries, but I think this is unprecedented. I don't think that anybody knows what's going to come out the other end. The big uncertainty is how long this is going to go on for. Is it a short-term issue or a long-term issue? And clearly the strategy that you need to get through it really depends on how long this is going to go. But my gut feel already is that it's going to be longer than people anticipated. I think it's going to be sharper and harder than people anticipate. I mean, we're talking about a uniform, synchronised shutdown of economies effectively around the world and definitely around the country. And going from being in business to complete stop in certain sectors. I'm not sure how the government stimulus is going to play out. For some people, it's a substantial amount of money that people are starting to receive, but everyone's asking me the same question. Well, is this going to be enough, and how long is it going to last, and what's going to come next? So I think the level of financial support from the government is so substantial that it's almost scary.
Can I ask you, obviously being in WA, mining services is big. Without, we've got a number of clients in mining services, and they seem to be going okay at the moment. I mean, what's the general feel?
Well, look, it's interesting. We have one very large customer in that space. They've got the best outlook they've had in 2 or 3 years, and they've won a whole series of new contracts in the last couple of months. We share the offices here with a mining services contractor, and they were just telling me that they're almost business as usual as well. So that sector seems to be the least affected out of anybody, as far as I can tell at this point.
Right. And are there any other sectors in WA that, I mean, I guess you've got agriculture and construction. I mean, what about those sectors? I guess ag would be fine.
Yeah, well, that seems to be. So we have a large food manufacturing customer. Now, speaking with them only this week, their concern is that a lot of the food manufacturers have 2 segments, one being, pubs and clubs and restaurants, and the other being retail trade. So you've got one that's completely shut down and one that's going crazy. So trying to work out how customers are affected, it's taking a little bit of time, and then the people who do supply that sort of trade business are trying to pivot into how do they support retail. So Now, one of the fears is that there's a stockpile of food, obviously, that's not being sold into those traditional restaurants and everything else. Plus, a lot of that stock is imported. So there's a ton of food on the water that's coming. So the customer suggested to us that you're going to see paddocks full of containers full of dry goods, and that cool stores potentially going to run out of space.
Right.
So that's something we're trying to keep an eye on to see how it goes. Now, we rang one of the big food distributors just to see how they're going in terms of their cool store availability, and I think they're okay at the moment, but I'm not sure there's a lot of forward planning going on.
Yeah, I mean, I've had clients that supply the likes of Woolies and Coles over the years, and I'm familiar with this concept of pipe fill. You get the first order, and it's going to go to 800 Woolworth stores, and you think it's going to be the same every week. But the same thing is probably happening in people's homes, where they've got, their larders are chockers, and you wonder if there's going to be a drop-off in demand. One of my sons works at packing shelves at Coles, and they seem to be extending his shifts. So, what about you, Sule? Are you getting any inquiry from retailers?
Probably not. I think retail is an interesting proposition from a restructuring professional point of view, because at the small end, what you end up ordinarily having is people have a closing down sale, get rid of as much stock as possible, and walk the keys down to the landlord and hand the keys over, and hope the guarantees don't come and get them. That doesn't apply to those who've got central HQ and significant sort of back office and multiple locations, of course. But besides in the early 2 months of the year, where some major retail businesses went into administration or the like, there hasn't been that many significant ones occurred after that period of time, or at least in the last 2 weeks of 2.5 weeks of official lockdown anyway.
Brendan, I know that you do a bit of work with funds. Are there any industries that you're seeing? Obviously, retail is the obvious one. Are there any industries that you're getting particular inquiry from?
We're getting a fair bit of inquiry, but it's pretty broad. I just echo what everybody else has said. The problem is a lot of them are too far gone, and they're just in shock. So engagement out of them. I think we'll hear more from them. We need to see an end in sight for a lot of these businesses that are being mothballed before we can do anything for them restructuring wise. So there's the part of the market that's just shut. So I spoke to somebody who had sacked 600 staff yesterday.
Sacked or stood down?
Sorry?
Sacked or stood down?
Yeah, I suppose you'd say they've taken advantage of the stand downs, but I think essentially, crystallised because they kept 100 and the 100 are on the 25%. So the government pays 75%, they pay the 25% top up. Is kind of how it's worked out for them, most of their staff. The head office, to take Sule's example, but they laid off 600 people. I think it was Jamie. Someone was saying this is going to cost the government a fortune, but there's a lot of that going on. So there's those businesses. I'm not. They've got other projects where I might be getting involved, where there's big chunks of bank debt. But no. Then you've got the ones that have done well out of it. We've got a few clients that we're involved with at the moment that are doing pretty well out of it. Thank you very much. Like your food people, and ag. But how long that lasts, I don't know. And then there's everybody else that I think's going to be the next wave. So property is going to be, I think, an issue. There's, I'm hearing insurance is there's all sorts of perversities that are going to flow from this in sectors that haven't been considered as obviously linked to the down.
I might just add a couple of things to Brendan's there, if you don't mind, Nick.
Sure.
It's hard to make sense of what industries at this point in time, 2 and a bit weeks into this. But in the last 5 or 6 days, out of the Sydney office, we've had appointments across recruitment, dentistry, which I might add is that's something that hasn't happened in the majority of my career. Dentists usually are an immune business, and unless there's some sort of personal behavioural issues with dentists, they're usually quite a profitable business. And obviously hospitality in terms of catering restaurants and things like that. So it's hard to make sense of those industries as to what's a proliferation of problems at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, look, we'll move on to some of the things that we're seeing in the news. And hopefully if I click on this, we've got my first headline, which is new to bank SMEs face imminent credit. I'm going to come to you in a second, Jamie, to get your thoughts on that, because I know you do a little bit of, a fair bit of arranging. I was just talking to a friend of mine about half an hour ago who is an equipment finance broker, and he does a lot of equipment finance. And here are some of his comments. He said that there is often when you're arranging lease finance, people get pre-committed limits. They might have a limit for $1 million, and throughout the year they're buying bits, odds and sods of equipment and drawing down on those limits. Obviously, those limits are now banks are having second thoughts on. Another thing I heard was that if you're applying for new credit to a bank and they find out that you've got COVID relief with another bank, you know, they're not calling it a black mark, but they're saying thank you, but no thank you. That's something else that's being talked about. Processes are being dragged out, so things that normally took 24 hours are taking a week. They're reviewing their credit matrices, so normally their credit approval process, particularly in equipment finance, I'm talking about if you fit the matrix, well, those are being reviewed. The other thing was I saw David Gandolfo, who's the president of CAFPA, the Finance Brokers Association, was making the comment that the banks have been making it hard for their brokers to apply for relief for their customers. And my other friend said that the CBA now has an opt-out process. So rather than have to apply to get help, you have to apply not to get help, more or less. You opt out of that process. So Jamie, I know that one of the hats you wear is finance broker. How does this play to you? This headline, new to bank SMEs finding imminent credit crunch.
Look, it's quite interesting. We did a lot of analysis around the GFC, and most people didn't see the GFC coming or predict it. Now, there were a few very wise people who said if you keep an eye on the cost of credit to those second-tier providers, that you should be able to see it coming, because it will start to escalate. And so we're starting to get emails coming through about different firms, you know, putting up their interest rates as at the same time the Reserve Bank's cutting interest rates. So that's a concern. There's been a proliferation of, you know, fintech, neobanks, or whatever you want to call them. But I would expect that there'll be a washout of some of those. Some of them are good. I don't expect all of them to survive. We're hearing stories that the banks' processing centres, particularly in India and the Philippines, they're closed. So you've got to expect the bank's going to be slow to respond in certain areas. I expect that those centres in the near future will be onshored, and those will probably be relocated. So things are slow, things are uncertain. There's been a lot of discussion around the banks the government's partially guaranteed $250,000 working capital emergency facility. That's been slow to roll out because people can't work out where it fits. You also have customers who might have been in mild distress beforehand who are not going to be allowed access to it, and other customers are in better shape who will be allowed access to it, though we talked about some of those perverse outcomes.
You talk about who's got access to the help and who doesn't have access to the help. I'm asking this question of a lot of people, Sule. I'm just coming to you next. And I'll just go to the next headline. More companies will fold under lengthy shutdown. I want to try and keep these streams as positive as possible. I don't want to get too negative on them, but we've got this BOQ has received 10,000 requests for assistance from its 168,000 small and medium businesses. If I was in restructuring, if I was in credit restructuring, if I was in Bad Bank as a small business client, what sort of relief do you think is available to me?
Well, I think it's really difficult for a bad banker at the moment to deal with these sort of issues, because I think Brendan alluded to it in his prior response. There's a real issue here around the secondary market for assets and business in distress. So if you're a bad banker and you've got a client or a client who's experiencing some issues, if they're responsive in terms of information, cooperating, keeping you informed on things, you're probably more than likely going to give them a little bit more rope. because what do you do with their particular assets and business at this point in time? I mean, let's be frank, no one wants to do anything at the moment. I don't want to buy a car. I don't want to buy anything. I don't want to make any decisions. And I think that's reflective of where a lot of people are. So if a bad banker has got a business that's got some issues, what's the salvation for their business and or assets and or recovery process? Very, very difficult.
Yeah, I guess. What about your thoughts, Brendan, on the restructuring parts of banks and what they might or might not be able to do?
Yeah, very little. They're not selling. The problem that you've got as a bank is you own too much of the market. They'll have a large portion of their debts going into impairment, their book. They're too big. They have too much debt to just sell into the market at the same time. So, you know what I mean? They create their own problems. And so I think, as Sule said, they don't really, at this point, they'd be mad to try and step on enforcing, against certain sectors. I've heard rumours that the word receivership's been used in banks for the first time in 10 years the other day. But speaking to a banker yesterday that, that wasn't their thoughts. So I think it varies different bank to bank. But the big issue is, the big problem that's coming down the line for everybody is liquidity, as Jamie is alluding to. I mean, liquidity is going to be the problem. And what we haven't talked about is that public companies, because we do it with some people that want to raise the bigger end of town, they, there's no listings happening at them. There's no IPOs. There's no, no recaps. So where do you get your money from at the moment? The banks aren't doing new deals.
Well, I know that obvious areas like large publicly listed entities that are involved in travel seem to be trying to get capital raises away, and I haven't seen them whether they've been successful or yet, but it'd be interesting to know what sort of a discount you would pay for those shares.
Well, I speak to quite a few different businesses in different sectors, diverse ones, and they struggle to get, and I wouldn't like to say who they are because they're public, but the general view at the moment is that there's no money to be made on, if you've got a list or if you've got a capital raise, now's not the time to do it. And if there's any hairs on it, it'll be a struggle. And so the flow-on effects of that is manifold, including that the poor bankers, which everyone hates, lawyers and the accountants have nothing to work on.
Yeah,
this is where the government hasn't put it through. It's one market. We're all linked, and so now you look at KPMG. You're getting to it, but all of them, they're all starting to cut. The big guys are all cutting staff, and they're not spending money. So Saul is not spending money. We're all feeling it, but there's no immune.
Yeah, I would just say I had a friend at GE who always said you've got to separate the banker from the bank. The banker is usually, a nice person to do what they can, but they're normally handcuffed due to the bank. Interesting. So that article I've got there refers to BOQ, and that's from the Sydney Morning Herald. There was another article which may have been the same press release, I don't know, but I've just highlighted there, is this a V-shape or U-shape? They're talking about a V-shaped recovery. I'll go to you next, Jamie. We can't really tell what's down the road. What do you think about a V-shape, meaning things bounce back with a vengeance?
I think, and I want to be respectful to different opinions. I always like to keep a second option open, but I think that's fanciful, to be honest with you. Yeah. So I think that it was touched on a couple of points where there's unintended consequences. So the fact that creditors now can't enforce against you means you can't force your customers to pay you either. So we're expecting that you're going to see businesses move to COD and cash terms.
Yep.
Yeah, I did a live stream last week on Tuesday, and if anybody's interested, it was with Travis Dix from NCI, and we talked about tips and hints for getting paid. I mean, my mantra is that the government's providing bailouts and the banks are effectively providing, passing on the bailouts of the government. SMEs shouldn't be bailing anybody out. So, people should be paying their SME invoices. Obviously, me as a debtor financier, I'm self-interested to say that, but people have got to keep bills. And I've got to say, so far we we're noticing that collections seem to be fine. Okay, the next article I've got here, I'll come to you, Sule. The two big well, this is a similar sort of subject, I suppose. This is Caramelli in the Financial Review. Two big calls bank bosses are about to make. One was about dividends. Well, I think that one's been made. The banks aren't paying dividends. I think is the story. They're hanging on to that money. But the other one is trying to work out if and what sort of provisions they should be making. I mean, how would you? I mean, you're in insolvency. The bank. The head of restructuring at Westpac rings you up and says, "Listen, Soleil, can you help us out in trying to work out a loss position?" How would you go about doing that?
Extremely difficult. I might just, before I sort of get into the question you've asked me, it's interesting and quite scary, really. I love looking at charts, in particular of the banks, and I did see a chart not too long ago that sort of compared what the banks have been doing in the last month, 5 weeks, to what happened in 1929. And we're all hoping that the second half of the graph doesn't enliven itself, because essentially the graph in 1929 looks like 30 to 45% down very quickly, a moderate recovery, and then the next 50% slide after that. So it's extremely concerning if it was to head in that direction. But anyway, I'm not a chartist, as you said, insolvency practitioner. I think the banks have got their hands full looking after existing clients. And I think it's well known, new business is very difficult to write at the moment. If the existing clients are misbehaving themselves, it's very difficult to deal with them because there's no secondary market in lots of industries. I don't think anyone who's invested in banks, who's thought about it logically, is expecting a dividend in the next 12 to 18 months. Yes, some of the capital adequacy provisions have been relaxed in the crisis, but fundamentally investors won't be expecting great dividends out of this. There's a bit of pain to come. It's really quite immeasurable for the banks what impact on earnings this is going to have. And any, like myself, fair weather investor will be looking at the next reporting season and being quite concerned about what numbers roll out at that point in time.
Look, I mean, from our point of view, Brendan said a minute ago, larger firms looking to raise capital, because at one end you've got SMEs trying to raise money from their banks. At the other end, you've got larger firms, trying to raise capital in the markets. I mean, we're certainly very interested in the middle market, I guess the lower middle market, and capital raisings there, because they're sort of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. They're not really small enough to get the cuddles from the banks, and they're not quite big enough to go to the market. So we're beginning to see a little bit in that space, and we're certainly getting ready for that. Okay, my next slide is PM plans staggered virus exit. So I guess this, I was talking, we had our weekly sales meeting with my state managers this morning, and one of them made the analogy about, we're supposedly hibernating, but when a bear hibernates, they have a nice big feast before they go to the cave, but nobody really got a chance to hibernate this time around. You're being pretty good to pick this one. So, when can we go back to work? I mean, how long can this last? And is it staggered? Do we say anybody under the age of 30 and with a VO2 max of X can go back to work, and the rest of us have got to stay shut up indoors? What do you think, Brendan?
You're asking the wrong person, mate. I don't know, but I think the whole thing's mad. The elephant in the room is, what the heck are we doing, guys? We're ruining our economy. Why we all don't know? It doesn't make any sense. The numbers don't justify it from what I can see. And if you're immune deficient, I've got friends at home, fair, and you're old, stay home. But for the rest of this, and what happens when we come out? It doesn't go away, this thing. We're going to all get it anyway, it seems. But whatever. I don't know. Like, what can we ever come out safely? Doesn't make sense to me. What's happened elsewhere, maybe we'll come out in a staged way, my sense, in a few months. But you got intergenerational conflict arising out of this. Like, a lot of people are really angry about the lockdowns, and I worry about, I worry about what the flow-on effect for society is, because a lot of people feel really upset about it.
Well, I've got, I've got youngsters saying to me, well, we're all staying home for you now to stop you oldies like me. I'm a pentagenarian, I think, or quintagenarian. I don't know. I'm in my 50s anyway. We're staying home for you so you don't die of this thing. And when this is over, we're going to expect you to sort of sign into the Green New Deal. But let's not go quite there. Jamie, the other guys, I guess it's a fair comment to say they tend to get involved when things have gone horribly wrong. I'm sure they'd like to get involved before then. But you are sort of more ahead of the curve, I guess. I'm imagining, would get involved earlier on. How do you forecast? Because I know you get involved in forecasting and that sort of thing. I mean, how do you scenario plan? Are you working with clients and scenario planning, listing ends in 3 months, it ends in 1 month, it ends in 6 months? What do you do?
Look, that's a great question, and just we're in the middle of due diligence on an acquisition at the moment, right? So, and we've spent 2 months trawling through profit and loss and sales reports and average revenue by business day and revenue by customer by business day. And I said to both, the vendor and the purchaser that, this might be a waste of time because the world's changed. And so what we're trying to do is I've asked the vendor to list all their customers by industry, and we're trying to rank those by industry risk and trying to make a sound decision with imperfect information. But it is difficult. The scenarios that we've been running through is 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. I don't think you can think past that, but they're the three likely outcomes. We've had one client who does a bit of work, imports equipment from Italy. So in Italy, it's been running circa 4 months. So we've got to expect it's going to be at least that long. The big focus for me really is looking at what's happening in Sweden. So Sweden's gone a different direction. They've gone they've moved to the herd immunity model. Now, when I speak to medical professionals, that's what they all mention to me, but no one mentions it publicly, that you let a percentage of the population catch the virus, the lower risk, quarantine all the high risk people, and you build immunity. So that the concern with what we're doing in Australia is, and I'm tracking this every day. If you look on my Facebook page, I've published the numbers each day, and I've just added Sweden to the data series. But in Australia, the death rate has been around 0.5%, starting to move up to about 0.7%, but it's basically a tenth of what it is anywhere else. So the challenge with that is if you, a bit like Brendan was saying, if you lock people up, well, it's not going to achieve anything. So everyone's going to come out and they won't have any immunity, and we've destroyed the whole economy for it. And I think that, this is intergenerational theft that's going on at the moment. And, for what's happening right now, I can't see this debt being paid off in under 100 years. Like, if you think about what the deficit's going to look like, it's going to be circa, almost 200 billion at least. Now, that's just the deficit. Now, if that takes 5 or 6 years to come under control, and we're 12 years post the GFC and it's not under control, it's going to be 10 years before we even think about repaying it.
Surely the whole world's going to have to inflate all of this stuff away. I mean, that's what you've got to ask yourself, how we get out of it. How are you guys finding working from home? I mean, what are you finding it more productive, less productive?
I think there will be some alteration to how Australian businesses conduct their business at the back end of this, and that's something, I suppose, positive. Whilst it's been thrust upon us in quite an unusual, scary way, I think flexible working arrangements, working from home, remote access, and all these sort of investments in technology, I think there's some real positives there. But there's no doubt for a professional services firm that timesheet as a core benchmark in productivity is not going to be the same if the bulk of your workforce is working from home as opposed to coming to the office. Now, that's not to say you can't be productive from home, but I think most of us subliminally like the routine and the procedure of getting up in the morning, having a shower, coming to work, setting the work day and working for 7-8 hours and doing your thing. not many people have an environment at home that you can put yourself to task for 7, 8 hours, whatever it might be, and be as productive without any interference or distraction. So overall, I think productivity at this time, because of the fear and concern, is down, is my position. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, guys, I'm just looking at the clock. We might wrap it up. Any sort of closing thoughts or comments from Jamie or Brendan?
Look, from our perspective, we've been working on customers building scale for the last couple of years, and I think that trend will accelerate. I think that hopefully we come out of the other end of this with some serious economic reform, which has basically been on the back burner for kind of circa 10 years, and we come out of it bigger and stronger. So I think there's going to be heaps of M&A opportunities, and I said most of the customers just need scale.
Is that what you would say, opportunities coming out of this?
Yeah, I hear high net worth telling me that it's nothing but opportunities. I'm sure Jamie's right, but the problem, if you look at how these things work, I think there's a heck of a lot more downside to come, and I think a lot of people are going to get burnt trying to be smarter than everybody else by buying up the opportunities that turn out, they call them depressions because they're depressing. It's because it's really hard to time the bottom. And there'll be there'll be opportunities, but then who's got money? I think you've got to be really careful. I think this thing's I don't think the government has any clue what they've done globally, and they've started a pack of cards. It's going to be really hard to arrest. It's going to be pretty bad, I reckon. But at some point, Jamie, you'll be right. It's just don't know when.
Look, my personal view is that certainly the health thing, I think that we'll all be back to work a lot sooner than certainly than what they were saying a little while ago. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to get everybody up and running again. I'm on Botany Road. I can see plenty of traffic out there. There's certainly still a lot of construction still going on. I do come into the office every morning, and the tradies are still driving like lunatics in their utes and what have you. I'm sort of upbeat health-wise. I think we'll be okay health-wise. Economy-wise, who knows? But look, thank you very much, Sule, trade-on expert, and Brendan and Jamie. And thank you to everybody for watching, whether it's live or on our replay. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Cheers.
All right. Thanks. Thank you.